My name is Jack Lawson, 45, Denver, Colorado. I ran a small garage off Federal Boulevard, the kind of place that still kept paperwork orders and a coffee pot older than me. The one thing in my driveway that wasn't for sale was a 1964 Airstream Safari my father left me, polished aluminum, sun-bleached curtains, dents like fingerprints, every mark on it had a story. On a bright Saturday noon, the street looked like a parade route. A white flatbed idled at my curb. Two men in dark uniforms with shiny duty belts fanned out in front of it. And Madeline Ross, our HOA president, stepped onto my driveway as if she were christening a ship. Her blazer was winter white in summer light. Her smile something practiced for a donor luncheon. "Mr. Lawson," she announced, raising a plastic-sleeved document. "This emergency abatement order authorizes immediate removal of the non-compliant recreational vehicle. We'll keep it safe pending a compliance check." The two uniformed men weren't police. The patches on their sleeves read, "Community Compliance." Their boots were polished, their haircuts regulation neat, and their hands rode the way trained hands ride on holsters they didn't actually have. The tow operator set his chains down and glanced at me like he'd prefer this be simple. I didn't move. "Before you touch it," I said, "we're going to read that order together." She offered me the sleeve. The paper inside showed a city seal that bled at the edges like it had been printed on a home machine. The statute cited was paragraph 12-18-407B. In Denver, it should have been paragraph 12-18-407. One digit out of place can change the universe. The signature block listed a deputy director I knew had retired last year. My hands stayed steady. Years under hoods had taught me patience that could outlast rust. I lifted my phone and tapped the city hotline. "Denver Public Works. Abatement," a woman answered. I put it on speaker. "Ma'am," I said, "I have an emergency abatement order number DA61342 for immediate removal of a recreational vehicle at my address. Can you confirm?" she typed. The street was so quiet I could hear her nails. "No such order in the system," she said. "And we don't issue field orders by phone to HOAs. If there's abatement, a city crew with marked vehicles performs it. Do not surrender property to private parties." Across the sidewalk, Rosa Alvarez, my neighbor, lowered her watering can and raised her eyebrows. She stepped back into her porch shade and I watched her lift her own phone. Later I'd learned she called 911 and told them there were men in uniforms at my driveway who weren't police. Madeline kept her smile, but it thinned at the edges. "Clerical delay," she said, sliding the sleeve toward her chest. "While that gets sorted, we'll stage the trailer on the truck. It's safer for everyone." Blue and red washed the aluminum like a sudden storm. A cruiser eased to the curb. Two officers got out, one younger, alert, one older with a mustache and a sun-creased face that said he'd stood on a lot of porches between neighbors who couldn't agree. He asked for identification. The two compliance men produced laminated badges that read Neighborhood Safety Unit, a name no city agency used. The older officer studied the plastic-sleeved order, then angled it so his partner's body cam saw the seal, the number, the signature. "Ma'am," he said. Polite because he could afford to be. "This appears to be a forged municipal document. If so, that's a criminal matter. Also, no one here is law enforcement. You will not remove property today." Madeline's laugh was light. A stage note. "Officer, we hired a compliance vendor recommended by our management company. If they misinterpreted authority, we'll address that internally." "Address it with your attorney," he said. He took the paper, slid it into an evidence envelope, and read a case number to my phone. He told the tow operator to clear the block. Chains clinked back into a bin. The flatbed crept off, quiet as a dog leaving a room it had been caught in. The uniforms without a department lingered. Up close, I could smell citrus cleaner and starch. The older officer took their names and warned them that impersonating an officer even by costume and suggestion was not a gray area. He didn't cuff anyone on my lawn. In my experience, good cops build clean cases. They don't swing at smoke. When the cruiser pulled away, the street refilled with ordinary noise sprinklers ticking, a distant mower, a kid's basketball thudding against driveway concrete. Madeline didn't leave. She walked the length of the Airstream like a buyer appraising a car she already believed she owned. Sunlight wavered across her sunglasses. "You understand, Jack," she said quietly. "The bylaws prohibit storage of recreational vehicles in view. There are charitable options that reflect well on the community. Youth programs love donations." My father's handwriting lived inside that trailer pencil notes on a cabinet hinge he swore he'd replace and never did. A date scrawled beneath the breaker panel from the summer he took me to the San Juans. I kept my voice level. "Nothing leaves this driveway without a court order. Not a letter with a cartoon seal. Not a suggestion. A judge's ink." She tilted her head the way people do when they choose not to hear. "It would be a shame," she said, "if non-compliance forced further action." That afternoon, I climbed a stepladder and changed angles on the garage camera so it could see both side yard gates and the street. I checked the AirTag I'd hidden months ago inside the Airstream's lower cabinet, nestled behind a blank panel most people wouldn't think to pull. I wrote the new case number in a notebook that already held a neat stack of HOA notices and my dated responses. Paper wins. My father used to say that to make an engine run right, you go and order spark, fuel, air, and you never skip a step because you're impatient. She'd tried daylight and a costume. Daylight hadn't worked. Costumes had been noticed. People like Madeline don't quit. They change tactics. By evening, the aluminum skin of the trailer had cooled to mirror the sky. I stood in the garage doorway and listened to the neighborhood settle. The way a machine settles when it's almost at idle, but not quite. I flipped on the small red recording lights and let them glow. The next morning, the neighborhood looked ordinary again. Sprinklers hissing, dogs barking, the smell of coffee drifting through screen doors. But nothing felt ordinary to me. I sat in my garage with the Airstream gleaming behind me like a mirror of yesterday's standoff. My name was already tied to a police case number. A forged municipal order was in evidence, and half a dozen neighbors had witnessed the spectacle. Madeline Ross hadn't lost, not in her mind. She'd been embarrassed, and humiliation in someone like her wasn't an ending. It was fuel. I thought about how we'd gotten here. When I bought this house 5 years ago, the HOA was background noise. Dues went to mowing the common green, trimming the shrubs at the entrance. Meetings were sparsely attended and uncontroversial. Then Madeline was elected president. She said the words that always sound good in campaign flyers, protecting property values, enforcing community standards, preserving aesthetics. But what she really meant was she wanted control. And she wanted everyone to know she had it. It started small. A warning for leaving my trash cans visible an extra hour. A note that my front porch light was non-conforming because the bulb was too bright. I paid attention, corrected what I could, and filed the notices with their dates and my replies. My garage filled with binders, gray 3-ring spines labeled with month and year, each letter preserved in plastic sleeves. My father used to say you fixed machines by keeping track of every piece. People weren't so different. By year 2, she had a board of loyalists. Some wanted to be in her circle. Others were too timid to oppose her. Fines increased. A neighbor down the block paid $200 because his daughter left sidewalk chalk drawings overnight. Rosa Alvarez, who lived beside me, got written up for unapproved ornamentation when she put ceramic sunflowers in her flower bed. The sunflowers stayed. The fines doubled. People grumbled, but they paid. Fighting takes time, and most of them had kids, jobs, lives that didn't leave energy for a paperwork war. The Airstream was when she truly fixed her eyes on me. 6 months ago, I found the first envelope white, HOA logo sharp at the top. Inside a warning that recreational vehicles were not permitted to be stored in driveways for more than 4 hours. I read it twice, then laughed. Airstreams are travel trailers, not commercial vehicles, and nothing in the state code prohibited driveway storage on private property. I wrote a polite letter, cited statute, enclosed a copy of my registration, and filed it away. That should have been the end. 2 weeks later came a fine $100 for excessive noise generated by vehicle operation. The Airstream didn't make noise. It was parked. No generator, no music, nothing. I attended the HOA meeting, stood when recognized, and calmly laid out my case. Madeline sat at the head table in her tailored jacket, listening with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When I finished, she said the board would take my comments under advisement. The fine stood. I didn't pay. I filed the notice and my response in the binder. More letters followed. Aesthetics violation. Potential leaking fluids, attracting vermin. Each one more absurd than the last. Each one answered by me with documented evidence and filed away. They weren't trying to correct behavior, they were building a trail, a stack of justifications that could later be waived in front of a judge or an officer. I knew it. I just didn't know what the endgame was. Yesterday told me everything. It wasn't about noise or aesthetics. It was about taking. By mid-morning, Uncle Don, a retiree who lived 2 doors down, shuffled into my garage with his coffee mug. Heard the show yesterday, he said, nodding toward the trailer. She's not gonna stop. He'd been fined once for a non-conforming lawn figure. The figure was a fishing gnome, no taller than his knee. He still kept it, hidden behind a bush. But the bitterness in his voice told me he hadn't forgotten. I filed the report. I said, "Case number's in the system. If she tries again, it won't be civil anymore." Don shook his head. "She'll find another angle. People like her don't care about rules. They care about winning." That afternoon, I adjusted the side camera to cover the gate from the alley. I tested the AirTag signal from my phone. It pinged strong. Every precaution gave me the same hollow comfort a padlock gives. It keeps the honest people out. The dishonest find tools. I spent the evening at my kitchen table, binder open, flipping through the letters. They told a story if you read them in sequence, a slow tightening of screws. Vague accusations sharpened into fines, fines piling into the language of liens. Each document was a tooth in a gear turning toward something bigger. By the time the streetlights flicked on, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for another performance in broad daylight. I set my phone on the table, notification alerts enabled, battery fully charged. I propped a tablet beside it with the garage camera feed in full screen. I brewed a pot of coffee and left it black and strong. If she wanted the trailer, she wouldn't come waving a fake seal again. She'd come when the street was dark, and she'd send people who didn't care about bylaws or signatures. The house grew quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. I sat in the armchair, binder at my feet, eyes on the glow of the feed. The Airstream sat still, catching the orange streetlight in soft curves. I knew she was out there, somewhere, watching her own plan collapse, drafting the next one. And I knew the night wasn't going to pass without a test. I didn't bother with sleep that night. The coffee pot hissed on the counter, and the house sat still except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock. I watched the tablet propped on my lap, the garage feed filling the screen. The Airstream gleamed under the streetlight like a lure hanging on a dark line. At 2:11, my phone buzzed motion detected at the side alley. I tapped the alert. On screen. Headlights cut briefly before going dark. A flatbed truck rolled slowly backward toward my driveway. Its engine kept low, almost a purr. No company logo, no marker lights, just a black silhouette easing into position like it had done this a dozen times before. 2 men jumped out, hooded sweatshirts, gloves, faces in shadow. One scanned the street with a flashlight kept low. The other knelt by the garage door. He had a tool, a thin rod he slid under the panel, fishing for the manual release cord. I felt the small tug in my chest that comes when you see something you can't stop and know you'll have to live with the seconds that follow. A click echoed through the feed. The garage door shuttered and lifted by hand. They didn't go for tools, didn't hesitate. They went straight for the Airstream. chrome caught the dim light as they rolled it out, tires whispering across concrete. They strapped it down with practiced speed. No wasted movement. This wasn't a desperate smash and grab. It was a job. I set the tablet on the arm of the chair, reached for the folder at my feet, and slid a blank sheet into place with a pen. Time, description, direction. I wrote as if I were a clerk recording shipments. My hand stayed steady. My father always said anger fogs the glass. You can't see the gears turning if the lens is clouded. The truck pulled away, trailer in tow. I switched to the alley camera. Its rear lights flickered once as they rounded the corner. I zoomed in, paused the frame, and there it was, license plate caked in dirt but legible under the infrared. I jotted it down. Another tooth in the gear. On my phone, the AirTag app blinked awake. For a heartbeat, the dot sat still at my address. Then it jumped, moving south. Every few blocks it pulsed again, a breadcrumb trail lighting up the dark. I grabbed my keys and jacket, not to chase. Not yet. To follow quietly, like a hunter tracking prints in fresh snow. The city at that hour felt deserted. Traffic lights cycled for no one. Storefronts sat hollow behind grates. I kept 2 blocks back. Headlights dimmed when I could, letting the blue dot on my screen guide me. The flatbed didn't rush. It moved casual, as if hauling nothing more than scrap metal. The driver knew drawing attention was risk. 20 minutes later, the dot stopped. A strip mall, long abandoned, slouched in weeds and broken glass. Half its windows boarded, the other half painted with graffiti. The truck rolled behind a graffiti-covered dumpster and went still. I parked a block away, killed my lights, and walked the rest on foot. Through a chain-link fence, I filmed with my phone. The men dropped the trailer, wheeled it beside the dumpster, and unhooked the chains. One lit a cigarette, the flame briefly carving his face into my lens too fast to capture clearly, but enough to show youth, not desperation. Paid hands, paid. They got back into the cab and drove away, leaving the Airstream like discarded trash. I stayed crouched until the rumble of the engine faded. My knees ached against cold asphalt, but my pulse stayed level. On the screen, the trailer looked lonely, a silver shell against shadow. Anger pressed at the edges of my ribs, but I locked it down. Documentation first, emotion later. I walked back to my truck, phone still recording, breath fogging the windshield as I settled behind the wheel. The AirTag dot glowed steady at the strip mall. I had what I needed: video of the theft, plate numbers, location data, enough for a file. Enough to start a case that couldn't be laughed off as aesthetic violations. The night wasn't over. Not for me. The theft wasn't the crime that mattered. The phone call that would come after that would be the real play. Madeline had tried daylight and failed. Now she'd tried darkness and succeeded halfway. What came next was leverage. She thought I'd be desperate. She thought I'd fold. I sipped cold coffee from a travel mug, the taste bitter and metallic. Across the empty lot, my father's trailer sat in the shadows, waiting. And so was I. By dawn, the AirTag still pulsed from the strip mall. I hadn't slept. I sat at the kitchen table with the blinds drawn, the screen glow washing my face while the little blue dot blinked steady. The trailer was still there, hidden behind that dumpster like it had never been worth anything. My father's handwriting lived in that Airstream. Penciled dates behind the fuse panel, notes about wiring, reminders only he and I would ever understand. Now it sat abandoned like scrap. At 7 o'clock, I called the non-emergency line. My trailer was stolen. I said, I can see its location through a tracker. I have video of the theft and the license plate of the truck that took it. The dispatcher asked for the plate number, the make, the model. Her voice was calm but distant, as if she were reading from a tired script. She gave me a report number and said an officer would be dispatched to verify. Do not approach the vehicle yourself. She added. I told her I understood. I didn't tell her I had already been there. An hour later, the same officer from the driveway the day before knocked on my door, the older one with the mustache and the voice that never needed to rise. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Mr. Lawson," he said. "We seem to meet often." I led him inside, sat him at the table, and showed him the footage on my laptop. The flatbed easing into my alley, the hooded men cutting the garage loose, the airstream rolling into the night, plate visible, timestamp clean. He leaned forward, studying. "This is solid," he said finally. "We'll need to verify the location." He radioed another unit. Minutes later, his partner called back. The trailer was exactly where my tracker showed. They would secure it and transfer it to City Impound for evidence. Relief should have hit me. Instead, I felt hollow. Evidence meant the airstream was safe for now, but it also meant it wasn't mine to touch until a case crawled through the system. Weeks, maybe months. My father's legacy locked behind chain link until prosecutors finished their paperwork. The officer handed me a slip of paper with the case number. "It's officially logged," he said. "But these guys are smart. The plate might come back to a shell company. Don't expect a fast resolution." He looked tired, but not unsympathetic. "Keep your binder updated. If they contact you, record everything. Extortion's easier to prove than theft." After he left, I stood at the garage door and looked at the empty space where the trailer had sat. The concrete rectangle felt like a missing tooth. I brewed another pot of coffee I didn't need. By mid-afternoon, my phone rang. Caller ID blocked. I let it buzz twice, then answered. "Jack, it's Madeline Ross." A voice smooth as glass. "I heard about what happened. Just terrible." "This neighborhood is going downhill, isn't it?" She didn't sound worried. She sounded rehearsed. I stayed silent. She filled the air. The police rarely recover these things intact, and when they do, the impound fees are astronomical. She paused, letting the words linger like baited hooks. Then her voice softened, almost confidential. "But sometimes there are ways to make problems disappear, especially when a neighbor shows a little community spirit." My free hand slid across the table and pressed the record button on the small digital device I kept nearby. Colorado was a one-party consent state. She didn't know she was digging her own grave with every word. "What kind of spirit?" I asked, forcing my voice to shake. "The part of a beaten man." "Well," she said brightly, "there are those outstanding fines. A few thousand, I believe. All very messy. But what if it could all just vanish? No more letters, no more trouble. Everyone wins." I closed my eyes and let her keep talking, the recorder glowing red. She thought the theft was leverage. She thought I was cornered. What she didn't know was that every syllable was another piece of steel in the trap I'd been setting since the first envelope hit my mailbox. I replayed her words 3 times that evening, listening to the false sweetness curl into threats. Madeline hadn't just stolen a trailer, she had rehearsed a performance. A script she'd likely run on others before me. "Donation," she'd said, "to a youth program." It was almost elegant in its corruption. A stolen trailer laundered into a charitable gift. No one could trace extortion if everyone smiled and called it philanthropy. I didn't trust my own copy of the recording. I drove across town to a friend, Mark Dwyer, an assistant prosecutor with the state attorney's office. We'd met years earlier through car shows. Both of us gearheads who could talk about carburetors until closing time. When I told him everything from the first notice to the forged abatement order, he grew still. When I played the recording, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening as Madeline made her pitch. "Pattern of coercion," he said finally. "She creates fines, leverages threats, then offers relief in exchange for property. That's textbook." He looked at me. "She's going to call again. When she does, don't argue, don't refuse. Let her talk. Keep her on the line." I nodded. "She thinks I'm already broken. She won't be able to resist twisting the knife." Back at home, I added Mark's card to my binder tabbed. Dated. Noted. The binder had become more than a file. It was a map, each page a step on a road I hadn't chosen but had to walk. 2 days later, the phone rang again. Same blocked number. I tapped record on both devices before answering. Jack, Madeline cooed. I've been thinking. That Airstream could do so much good for underprivileged youth. Imagine summer camps, outreach programs, job training. It's practically a public service waiting to happen. Her voice hardened. Sign over the title, and your fines vanish. Fail to cooperate, and who knows how long that trailer survives and impound storage fees pile up. Vehicles disappear. It would be such a waste. I let my breath hitch, just enough. I want it back. I'll do whatever it takes. That's the spirit. She purred. The line clicked. I knew Mark had joined silently, recording on his end. Everything was captured twice, legal and airtight. When the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the empty space in my garage. My father's trailer was out there, reduced to a bargaining chip in a suburban power game. Anger pressed against my ribs. But beneath it was something colder clarity. This wasn't about one man's trailer anymore. It was about every chalk drawing find, every garden gnome threatened, every letter slipped into a mailbox like a summons. Madeline had built a machine that fed on fear. My Airstream was just the biggest bite she'd tried to take. I closed the binder and set it on the table with a steady hand. The machine had run unchecked for years. But machines wear down, teeth strip, bearings seize. And when they do, the mechanic who's been watching patiently has the advantage. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, black as midnight, and waited for Mark's call. It came within the hour. We've got enough, he said. But if you're willing, we can go further. Not just save your trailer, expose her entire pattern. It'll take patience and precision. Are you ready for that? I looked at the blank space in the garage, then at the glow of the streetlight painting the concrete floor. I've been ready since the first envelope. The neighborhood looked calm on the surface, but beneath it the tension was coiled like a spring. Word had spread faster than weeds through the fence lines. Rosa told me 3 different neighbors had stopped her at the grocery store asking if I was the guy with the trailer. They didn't just want gossip. They wanted to know if I had proof that Madeline's reach stretched further than petty fines. That evening, Rosa knocked on my door, phone in hand. Jack, she said. Her voice hushed, though the street was empty. I couldn't sleep the other night. I was out on my porch when they came. I filmed it. She tapped play. Her shaky footage showed the flatbed truck reversing into my driveway, men lifting the garage door, rolling the Airstream into the dark. From her angle, you could see what my cameras missed. The bolt cutters flashing silver under the street lamp. The tarp they used to disguise the trailer once it was strapped down. It was rough, but damning. Will you give me a copy, I asked. Take the whole thing. People need to see what she's doing. Rosa's hands trembled as she passed me the file. It wasn't just fear, it was anger too, the kind that comes from years of being pushed into corners. With her video added to mine, the case was stronger. Still, it felt like pieces of a puzzle waiting for the final image to emerge. That image arrived the next night in the form of Eleanor Briggs. She was the HOA treasurer. 60 years old. A quiet woman with gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it made her look perpetually stern. I'd never heard her raise her voice at a meeting. When she knocked on my door, she looked pale, as if she'd just run a race she hadn't trained for. "Can we talk?" she asked. We sat at the kitchen table. She kept glancing at the windows, as if expecting Madeline herself to appear there. Finally, she leaned forward. "I can't do it anymore," she whispered. "She's using me to sign off payments I know aren't legitimate. Contracts with towing services, landscaping invoices that don't match the work done. Money routed through accounts I've never seen in our official books." I stayed silent, letting her spill. Sometimes silence is the only lever people need to pry open their fear. She told me if I didn't sign, I'd be personally liable for association debts. She said I could lose my house. Eleanor's voice broke on the last word. She pulled a folded set of papers from her purse, copies of invoices, signatures, routing numbers. One in particular caught my eye: asset recovery, special services, dated the same week as the first notice I'd ever received about the trailer. I slid the papers carefully into a new sleeve for the binder. "Thank you," I said. "This matters more than you know." Tears welled in her eyes, but she straightened her shoulders. "I'll testify if I have to. Just promise me she won't be allowed to keep doing this." "You have my word," I said, and I meant it. After she left, I called Mark. His tone sharpened when I told him. "This is it," he said. "Financial records plus video plus extortion. We're not looking at nuisance anymore. This is fraud, conspiracy, possibly racketeering. But if we go public too early, she'll spin it as vendetta. We need one more thing, something undeniable that ties her directly to the theft." I looked at the footage again, Rosa's angle overlaying mine. Eleanor's papers spread on the table beside the binder. The pieces were aligning. Madeline had left fingerprints everywhere, convinced her power made her untouchable. She thought she was playing chess while the rest of us played checkers. What she didn't see was that the board had already shifted under her. I closed the binder, pressed the edges flat, and whispered to the quiet house one more piece. Then the machine breaks. The following week felt like the silence before a storm. On the surface, the neighborhood returned to its rhythms: garbage trucks clanging down the street, kids pedaling bikes, sprinklers ticking across lawns. But I knew better. Madeline hadn't called again, and her silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. Eleanor's papers lay spread across my kitchen table like an autopsy. Payments to Black Birch Recovery signed under duress. Landscaping invoices triple the normal rate. Transfers to an entity labeled Frontier Youth Mobility. I didn't need Mark to tell me what it meant: a shell funneling stolen assets into something that looked charitable on paper, but was nothing more than a slush fund with her son Tyler's name on it. That evening, I met Eleanor at a diner on the edge of town. She slid into the booth opposite me, hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was the only warm thing left in her life. "I've been treasurer for 8 years," she said softly. "I thought I was serving the community, but Madeline turned it into her own kingdom." She looked at me with tired eyes. "She's going to destroy me if she finds out I talked." "She won't," I promised. "Not until we're ready." When I returned home, I opened the binder again. The binder had grown fat: HOA notices, my replies, Rosa's video, Eleanor's copies, recordings of Madeline's silky threats. Each page was another rivet in the frame of a case no board member could ignore. The next day, Mark drove out to meet me. He didn't wear a suit this time, just jeans and a jacket, but his eyes carried the weight of his office. We went through everything, piece by piece. When he reached the page marked Frontier Youth Mobility, he tapped the name with a fingertip. "She's laundering," he said. "Towing contracts pay Black Birch. Black Birch moves property off the books. Assets are donated to this youth foundation, which just happens to have Tyler Ross listed as its only officer. The HOA dues become a pipeline straight to her family. Can we prove it?" I asked. "Not yet, but we can corner her into proving it herself." We spread the documents across my garage workbench, the Airstream's absence echoing in the space behind us. The plan forming between us wasn't just about recovering one trailer anymore. It was about dismantling the entire system she'd built on intimidation and fraud. Late that night, as I checked the garage camera one more time, headlights swept across the street. A car slowed in front of my house. The driver lingered long enough for the dash lights to silhouette a face I knew: Tyler Ross. He stared at the empty driveway where the trailer had sat, then pulled away. It wasn't a random pass. It was a message. The family had shifted tactics, and the next move was already on its way. The following morning, I found an envelope tucked beneath my doormat. No HOA logo this time, just my name typed in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper, notice of accrued fines, $4,850. No dates, no signatures, no breakdown of charges, just a number bold enough to scare someone into paying. I slid it into a sleeve for the binder. The difference between me and most neighbors was that I didn't crumble when the numbers got bigger. But I knew why the tactic worked. Ordinary families didn't want to risk liens on their homes or lawsuits they couldn't afford to fight. Fear was the cheapest tool in Madeline's kit. That afternoon, Eleanor called. Her voice quivered through the receiver. Jack, she's pressing me harder. She wants me to sign off on a transfer of HOA funds $10,000 to the Youth Foundation. She says it's for a scholarship program, but the account numbers match the ones I showed you. Don't sign, I said. She told me if I refused, she'd have me removed for negligence. Eleanor's voice cracked. I don't know how much longer I can stand up to her. You've already done more than most, I said gently. Hold the line a little longer. Help is coming. That night, I met Mark again at the diner. He'd brought a paralegal with him this time, a quiet woman named Dana who typed everything we said into a laptop. Mark explained it simply. We need an airtight package: financials, video, audio, corroborating witnesses. We already have the theft and the extortion. What we need now is proof that HOA funds were deliberately routed into her family's foundation. Eleanor's testimony gets us close, but bank records will close the loop. How do we get them? I asked. He smiled grimly. Court order. And to get that, we'll need probable cause strong enough to satisfy a judge, which means our next step is black birch recovery. The name sat heavy between us. Those men hadn't looked like first-timers when they rolled my Airstream out of the garage. They'd moved like professionals who had practiced the drill. If they kept logs, and Mark was certain they did, they might hold the missing link tying Madeline's orders directly to the thefts. I went home uneasy but sharper than before. I scrolled through neighborhood forums that night, reading thread after thread of complaints, basketball hoops banned, holiday lights fined, even a disabled veteran threatened for building a ramp. All of it had Madeline's fingerprints. She wasn't just greedy, she was systematic. Around midnight, I checked the garage cameras. The driveway was empty, but across the street, Rosa's porch light flicked twice, a signal we'd agreed on. I stepped outside. She met me at the fence, her voice low. I've been watching, she whispered. 2 nights ago, another truck came down Maple Lane, stopped at the Gutierrez place. They've had a camper out back for years. The next morning, it was gone. Her eyes burned in the dark. She's not just after you, Jack. She's stripping this whole neighborhood piece by piece. I felt the truth of it settle like weight on my shoulders. My trailer was just one prize. The real target was every family who didn't know how to fight back. I promised Rosa I'd add her story to the file, and as I slipped back inside, I realized we'd crossed the line from defense to offense. Madeline thought she was building pressure. What she didn't know was that the pressure was already shifting back onto her. 2 days later, Mark called me just after sunrise. His voice carried the kind of energy that came when a loose thread finally unraveled. We've got a judge willing to review a warrant for black birch, he said. But we need one last piece of corroboration. Something that shows this isn't just neighborhood gossip. I told him about Rosa's account of the missing camper. He asked me to meet him at her house. Rosa welcomed us into her living room, her hands shaking slightly as she set her phone on the coffee table. I've been filming from my porch, she said. After what they did to you, I keep the camera ready. She opened a file and played a clip. The video showed another flatbed creeping down Maple Lane, its lights dark. It stopped in front of the Gutierrez property. 2 men jumped out, rolled a camper out from behind the fence, and strapped it down. The timestamp matched the night Rosa had mentioned. Mark's eyes lit with satisfaction. This is gold, he said. Same method, same truck, same pattern. We can prove it's not an isolated theft. It's systemic. By afternoon, we were downtown in a cramped office. Mark sliding paperwork across a desk to a magistrate. The judge watched the clips, scanned the invoices Eleanor had provided, and studied the transcripts of Madeline's calls. When he looked up, his expression was grim. "You've got probable cause," he said, signing the warrant. That night, investigators raided Black Birch Recovery. I wasn't allowed inside, but Mark kept me updated. The yard was littered with half-disassembled vehicles, boats, trailers, even a pickup with its plates stripped. In a back office, they found a DVR system humming quietly. On it were weeks of footage, trucks leaving at odd hours, assets arriving, being hidden behind tarps. Most damning were the work logs, spiral notebooks scrawled with dates, addresses, and instructions. One page listed mine in neat handwriting: Lawson Silver Airstream Pickup by 0215. Deliver to lot. Await further instruction. Payment recorded as cash. No signature except the initials M.R.R. When Mark read that part to me over the phone, I felt the cold clarity of a bolt snapping into place. There it was, the direct tie. Madeline Ross wasn't just running an abusive HOA. She was orchestrating thefts, funneling property through a shell foundation, and grooming her son to benefit from the proceeds. By the following morning, Eleanor's fear had turned to resolve. She met us again, this time handing over a thumb drive she'd quietly copied from the HOA's accounting system. "She doesn't know I pulled it," she said, her voice steadier than before. The files showed transfers from association accounts to Frontier Youth Mobility, masked as community outreach. Each payment aligned with dates from Black Birch's logs. We sat in my garage late into the night, evidence spread across the workbench like engine parts. Video from Rosa, DVR stills from the tow yard, work logs initialed M.R., Eleanor's financial records, and my recordings of Madeline's voice offering to wipe away fines if I signed over the title. Mark looked at me across the cluttered table. "Jack, this is bigger than saving one trailer. We've built a case strong enough to collapse her presidency and trigger criminal charges. The question is, do you want to let the courts handle it quietly? Or do you want the neighborhood to see the truth unfold in real time?" I stared at the empty space in the driveway where the Airstream belonged. For months, she'd used fear and procedure to grind us down. Quiet justice might satisfy the law, but it wouldn't free the neighbors who still believed they were powerless. "They deserve to see it," I said. "All of it. In the open." Mark nodded slowly. Then we prepare for the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse smelled of old carpet and lemon cleaner, the same smell it had every month, but that night the air felt charged. Neighbors filled every folding chair, lining the walls, some even standing near the back. Most people came for budget updates or landscaping disputes. Tonight, though, they were here for a spectacle they didn't know was coming. I sat in the last row with my binder on my lap, a thumb drive tucked inside my jacket pocket. Mark leaned against the back wall, not in an official capacity yet, but ready. Across the room, Madeline Ross presided at the head table. She wore a scarlet blazer, her hair pinned into a flawless knot, the picture of composure. Tyler sat in the front row, scrolling on his phone, pretending not to notice the stares. The agenda droned on landscaping bids, pool maintenance, a proposal for holiday light restrictions. Madeline ruled the room with crisp motions and a polished smile, cutting off speakers who wandered, reminding everyone of decorum. Her voice carried the authority of someone convinced no one would ever challenge her. When the final item arrived open forum, she scanned the crowd with that same benevolent smile. "Does any member of the community wish to address the board?" I stood. Heads turned, whispers rippled. To them, I was the man with the loud trailer, the troublemaker with endless fines. Madeline's smile widened as if she'd been waiting for me all night. "The board recognizes Mr. Lawson," she said. I walked to the small microphone, binder clutched against my chest. I kept my shoulders slightly slumped, my voice low but steady. "Good evening?" "Good. I'd like to discuss the matter of my outstanding fines. Recent events have forced me to reconsider my position. I'd like to propose a resolution. Madeline tilted her head, savoring the moment. She believed she was about to watch me beg. Go on, Mr. Lawson. But first, I said, I need to provide context. With the board's permission, I'd like to play a short recording. She spread her hands magnanimously. Permission granted. I slipped the thumb drive into the laptop connected to the projector. The screen flickered, and then her voice filled the speakers smooth, practiced, unmistakable. Sign over the title, and your fines vanish. Fail to cooperate. And who knows how long that trailer survives in impound. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, chairs scraping against tile. Madeline froze, her smile collapsing into a mask of disbelief. That's fabricated, she snapped, her voice cracking. Edited slander, but I wasn't finished. I clicked again. The screen lit up with footage. First my garage camera showing the flatbed in the dead of night, then Rose's shaky video from across the street, capturing the bolt cutters, the tarp, the theft from another angle. 2 perspectives, the same crime. The room fell into stunned silence. Neighbors stared at the screen, then at her. The board members shifted uncomfortably, edging their chairs away from her as though proximity itself might burn. Tyler's phone slipped from his hands onto the floor with a dull thud. I closed the binder and rested my hands on it. This is the context, I said, my voice no longer subdued. This is how our president enforces community standards. The silence broke into a rising tide of voices, angry, incredulous, liberated. And for the first time since she'd taken power, Madeline Ross no longer controlled the room. The uproar swelled like a wave breaking against a seawall. Neighbors who had sat silent for years suddenly found their voices. That's my camper. Mr. Gutierrez shouted from the back, his fists trembling at his sides. You stole it the same way you stole his trailer. A woman 2 rows up stood and held out a crumpled letter. You fined me $500 for my son's basketball hoop. Said it lowered property values. You threatened foreclosure. Voices overlapped, stories tumbling out. Uncle Don hoisted his faded fishing gnome in the air like a trophy. She fined me for this little guy, said he violated aesthetic uniformity. A gnome. And I paid it because I didn't think I had a choice. The board members at the head table shifted in their seats. One of them, a thin man with glasses who usually parroted every word Madeline spoke, leaned back as though distance might absolve him. Another folded her arms tightly, eyes darting anywhere but toward the crowd. Madeline slammed her palm on the table. This is an ambush. These recordings are fabrications. None of this would hold up in court. But her voice cracked, the veneer of control slipping. Then Eleanor Briggs, the treasurer, rose slowly from her seat in the second row. She looked pale but determined, clutching a folder in her hands. I can confirm what you've just seen, she said, her voice wavering at first, then gaining strength. I was pressured to sign fraudulent invoices. Money was funneled into a foundation controlled by her son. I have copies of the records. She held up the folder. Every payment, every false transfer. I can prove it. Gasps rippled through the room. Tyler's head snapped up, panic spreading across his face. Mom, don't, he blurted before biting down on the rest. His slip was louder than any confession. The room erupted again, voices overlapping, a chorus of betrayal and fury. Someone shouted, she used our dues like her personal bank account. Another cried, she nearly bankrupted us with those bogus fines. I stood silently at the microphone, letting the crowd's anger pour out. Years of frustration, humiliation, and fear were boiling over in real time. Madeline tried to shout over them. I was protecting this community. I was preserving our property values. Rose's voice cut through from the side. Values don't come from forged seals and stolen trailers. They come from honesty. And you don't know the meaning of the word. For the first time, Madeline faltered, her face flushed, her hands trembling against the tabletop. The authority she had wielded like a weapon for years was slipping through her fingers. One of the board members, usually her most loyal ally, rose to his feet. His voice shook, but his words carried weight. I move for an emergency executive session to consider the immediate suspension of the president pending investigation. Another board member's voice rang out, seconded. The gavel in front of Madeline lay untouched. She stared at the faces turned against her, and realized she no longer held command. The neighbors she had silenced for so long had finally found their voices, and they were all aimed at her. The room had reached a fever pitch when the doors at the back of the clubhouse swung open. The chatter cut off like a switch had been thrown. 3 figures walked in, 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a dark suit with a badge clipped to her belt. Behind them came Mark, carrying his briefcase, calm as ever. The suited woman strode to the front, her heels striking the floor like punctuation. Good evening. My name is Rachel Cortez, investigator with the state attorney's office. We are here regarding an active criminal investigation. Madeline's face drained of color. This is outrageous, she sputtered. This is a private association meeting. Rachel didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This association is registered under state law. That makes your actions subject to oversight. We have probable cause that multiple crimes have been committed, including extortion, fraud, and theft of personal property. She nodded to one of the officers, who produced a sealed envelope. We also have a warrant to seize all association records and electronic devices effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The officers began collecting laptops and boxes of files from the head table. One of the board members practically shoved his binder toward them, eager to put distance between himself and Madeline. I watched her closely. Her polished confidence was gone, replaced by something raw panic. She grabbed the microphone, her voice shrill. You can't do this. These people are lying. This is a conspiracy against me. Rachel faced her evenly. Mrs. Ross, you are entitled to counsel, but what you are not entitled to is immunity from the law. The officers stepped forward. Tyler lurched to his feet, blurting, It was for me. Mom. The foundation was mine. Just tell them it was me. His words fell heavy in the stunned silence, every neighbor hearing the confession. Madeline's eyes flared, but she said nothing. The officers guided her toward the door. She didn't fight. The queen of this little kingdom walked out flanked by uniforms, her son trailing behind with tears streaking his face. The moment the door closed, the room erupted not with confusion this time, but with release. Neighbors who had been silent for years clapped, some cheered, others simply sagged in relief. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Rosa gripped my shoulder, whispering, It's finally over. I stood at the microphone, binder still in my hands. The projector screen behind me was frozen on the last frame of the stolen trailer, the evidence that had tipped everything. It's not just my airstream, I said into the hush that followed. It's every fine, every threat, every ounce of fear we've all carried. She built her power on the idea that we'd never fight back. Tonight proves she was wrong. The board, shaken but suddenly free of its anchor, voted unanimously to suspend Madeline Ross pending the outcome of the investigation. For the first time in years, they looked less like enforcers and more like neighbors. As the meeting adjourned, people crowded around me shaking hands, thanking me, telling their own stories. I realized then it wasn't just about reclaiming a trailer. It was about reclaiming a community. And that fight had only just begun. The raid on Black Birch Recovery happened at dawn. I wasn't allowed inside the gates, but Mark kept me updated by phone as I sat in my truck a block away. Watching the flashing lights reflect off the corrugated metal siding, investigators moved like a well-drilled crew photographing, bagging, cataloging. When they finally wheeled out the DVR system, Mark's voice carried satisfaction. This is the backbone, he said. If the footage matches the logs Eleanor gave us, We'll have a complete chain order: pickup, delivery, payment. Hours later, he called again, his tone sharper, more excited. Jack, it's all there. Video of your Airstream being loaded, timestamps that match Rosa's clip, and a work order initialed M. Sor. She signed her own name into the crime scene. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. For weeks, I'd lived in the shadow of her games, waiting for the next strike. Now the evidence was stacked against her higher than any wall of bylaws she'd ever used to trap us. The next step was the books. Eleanor's thumb drive, those spreadsheets she'd copied in secret, was more damning than either of us had imagined. Transfers from HOA accounts into Frontier Youth Mobility lined up perfectly with dates of Blackbirch's pickups. Each donation conveniently arrived right after a property vanished. A camper, a boat, my Airstream. Rachel laid it out on the table for me one evening at the diner. Columns, rows, amounts, all highlighted. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping, she said. This is intentional fraud. She built a laundering system under the cover of community improvement, and she thought no one would connect the dots. I sipped burnt coffee, staring at the neat columns. So what happens now? Now, Rachel said. We tighten the net. The DA's office is filing charges: extortion, conspiracy, theft, fraud. But the neighborhood still needs closure. People have to see that they weren't crazy, that every fine and every threat wasn't their fault. That was when she told me the plan. Not just a quiet indictment, not just a trial months down the line. A special recall meeting of the HOA, called by petition, to strip Madeline of the title she'd abused. The state would stand behind it, but it had to come from the residents. Within 48 hours, signatures poured in. I walked door to door with Rosa and Uncle Don, binder tucked under my arm. People didn't just sign, they vented. They told stories I'd never heard: liens threatened over cracked bird baths, children's bikes confiscated for being abandoned property, fines for leaving garage doors open too long. Each name inked on that petition was more than a demand for a vote. It was a reclamation. When we reached the required threshold, 60% of homeowners, the board had no choice. The recall meeting was scheduled for the following week. I stood on my porch that night, the air cool, the street oddly quiet. For the first time since this began, the Airstream's absence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a promise. Soon it would come home. And when it did, it wouldn't just be a trailer rolling back into a driveway. It would be proof that even in the smallest neighborhood, truth could still win. The night of the recall meeting, the clubhouse overflowed. Folding chairs ran out, neighbors lined the walls, and a cluster stood outside the open doors, straining to hear. The air carried a charge, not of fear this time, but of expectation. People had lived under Madeline's thumb for too long. Tonight was their chance to cut it off. The board sat at the head table, visibly rattled without their president. Eleanor looked pale but resolute, her folder of documents in front of her like a shield. When the gavel struck to open the session, murmurs rippled through the crowd. The first agenda item was brief, formal acknowledgement of the petition. Then came the motion of vote to recall Madeline Ross as president of the HOA. Hands shot up so quickly the count was almost unnecessary. The vice president announced the tally near unanimous. Applause broke out, followed by cheers, some people even standing in ovation. Years of tension released in a single moment of collective defiance. But the meeting didn't end there. One by one, residents came forward. Mr. Gutierrez, whose camper had vanished. The woman fined for her son's basketball hoop. A veteran who described being threatened with foreclosure for building a wheelchair ramp. Their voices filled the room, each story echoing off the walls like testimony in a trial. The shame and fear that had kept them quiet for years were gone. The next motion passed swiftly. Termination of all contracts with Blackbirch Recovery. Then, another censure of the board members who had enabled Madeline's schemes. None of them resisted. Heads hung low, eyes down. They accepted the judgment of the community they had betrayed. Finally, a resolution to revise the bylaws. Out went the vague clauses about aesthetic harmony and nuisance discretion. In their place, clear standards tied to city code, limits on fines, mandatory transparency in financial records. For once, rules meant protection instead of punishment. When the gavel fell again, the room erupted in applause. Some hugged, others wiped away tears. Rosa gripped my hand, whispering, "We're free of her." I walked outside into the night air. For the first time since this fight began, the street felt lighter. Porch lights glowed like lanterns of celebration instead of interrogation. Kids chased each other across lawns without parents hurrying to shush them. Even Uncle Don carried his fishing gnome openly, perched on the clubhouse steps like a mascot of rebellion. The change was more than procedural. It was cultural. A neighborhood that had lived in fear of letters and fines now spoke with one voice. And that voice had said enough. The Airstream was still locked in city impound, waiting for paperwork to clear. But I didn't mind the delay. Tonight wasn't about what sat in a lot behind a chain-link fence. It was about what sat in the hearts of the people who lived on my street. For the first time in years, it wasn't fear. It was hope. A week later, I drove to the city impound lot with a signed release form in my pocket. The gates clanged open, and there it was, my father's Airstream, parked between rusted sedans and abandoned pickup trucks. Dust dulled its skin, but when the sunlight struck the aluminum, I saw the same silver gleam that had caught my eye as a boy on summer trips. The attendant wheeled over the paperwork. "You're lucky," he said. "Most of these never make it back to their owners." I ran my hand across the cool metal. "Luck had nothing to do with it," I murmured. That afternoon, I spent hours polishing the trailer in my driveway, wiping every dent and curve until it shone. Neighbors drifted over, offering rags, coffee, even beer. Rosa stood by the fence, smiling wide. Uncle Don planted his fishing gnome proudly in the garden, no longer hidden. Kids biked circles around the cul-de-sac, free of watchful eyes waiting to scold them for being too loud. By evening, the trailer gleamed as if reborn. I stepped back, sweat on my brow, and felt something settle inside me. Not just relief, but restoration. The neighborhood looked different too. Porches lit with conversation, people waving openly to one another. Fear had been replaced with connection. News traveled fast. Local papers reported on the investigation, HOA president charged in fraud and extortion scheme. Prosecutors added counts of forgery and conspiracy after the black birch records came to light. Madeline's once perfect lawn now bore a "for sale" sign, its edges overgrown. Tyler had disappeared from sight, his charity dissolved, his name synonymous with scandal. At the next community meeting, without Madeline at the helm, the atmosphere was almost unrecognizable. Residents laughed, debated genuinely, passed motions that actually mattered: repairs to the playground, a block party for summer. Eleanor, no longer trembling, presented the accounts openly. Every dollar was accounted for. Transparency wasn't a slogan anymore. It was practice. Later that week, I hitched the Airstream to my truck and took it for a slow drive around the block. Neighbors waved, clapped, even cheered. It wasn't just my victory, it was theirs too. Each dent, each polished curve of that trailer had become a symbol of what we'd reclaimed: dignity, autonomy, the right to live without fear of a tyrant hiding behind bylaws. When I parked it back in the driveway, I stood for a long moment with my hand on the door. My father used to tell me, "A man's got to stand up for what's his. If you don't, no one else will." He was right. I looked down the street at kids laughing under the glow of porch lights, at Rosa on her swing, at Don's gnome catching the last rays of the sun. A question lingered in my mind, the kind worth leaving hanging in the air for anyone who cared to answer. When those in power twist rules to steal what's yours, do you stay silent for the sake of peace, or do you fight, no matter the cost?